I spent 18 years in Navy meteorology, believing that nothing in the ocean is actually cold. Cold is a word we use when we do not have the right gradient. For 42 minutes above the Strait of Hormuz, I had the right gradient. The word that came back was not cold. The word that came back was absent. A thermal imaging detector is a calibrated grid of microbolometers that return power in infrared wavelengths, normalized against a reference. The lowest number the detector can return, under any physical condition, is the noise equivalent temperature difference, the NEDT floor. It is not zero. It is a positive number close to zero, and the distance between that positive number and zero is the distance between a measurement and a vacuum. I know this because I am a thermal infrared oceanographer, and I have spent 18 years calibrating against the floor. On the 11th of April, 2026, a detector returned zero, not the floor, zero, and it returned it for 42 minutes. The detector was an AN/AAQ-24 variant, mounted on a P-8 Poseidon from Patrol Squadron 45, flying a morning blockade support track along the narrow channel between Larak Island and the Omani coast. The return came in as a geometric artifact, a perfectly circular footprint, 3.1 meters across, centered on coordinate 26 degrees, 32 minutes, 11 seconds north, 056 degrees, 14 minutes, 49 seconds east, at 0547 Zulu. The reading held for 42 minutes. It was confirmed, inside that same window, by an overhead asset I am not cleared to name in this recording, and by a shore-based mid-wave array at Ras Al Had on the Omani coast, operated by a different service under an independent calibration chain. 3 instruments, 3 different sensor architectures, all 3 returned 0 Kelvin in the same 3.1 meters of ocean. The ambient surface water measured at that coordinate the following morning by an oceanographic research vessel on station was 24.1 degrees Celsius. Surface salinity normal. Dissolved oxygen normal. The water was ordinary. The air, the radiance, the emissivity, none of the variables that would break an infrared instrument were broken. Every measuring instrument has a floor, and the floor is what we report when the physical reality of the target is quieter than the instrument can hear. 0 Kelvin is not a floor. 0 Kelvin is the theoretical cessation of molecular thermal motion, a state that, to the best of what physics has been willing to concede in my lifetime, is not accessible at sea level, in seawater, on a Tuesday. The file I was looking at had been forwarded to my terminal at 1400 Zulu on the same day. The subject line on the tasking was blank. The routing was wrong. It had skipped 3 echelons and 3 staff officers to reach me directly. I had, in 18 years, never been tasked on a sensor anomaly under the personal signature of a squadron commanding officer. I had never been tasked with a qualifier I had not seen before. The tasking read, and I am quoting, METOC Specialist, Thermal Null Experience Required. That last phrase is not a standard naval qualifier. I have since looked. It does not exist in the personnel manual. It does not exist in the enlisted rating structure. Somebody had written it specifically for me, in a tasking document that did not include a subject line, because a subject line would have had to be declassified for routing. I looked at the file for 12 hours before I called anyone. I am telling you that because it is the part of this story I still do not like. I am a skeptic by training, and when my detector tells me something impossible, I assume my detector. I pulled the raw fits from the P-8. I ran the sensor health telemetry for the flight. I audited the NEDT calibration pre-flight and post-flight. I ran a synthetic blackbody trace against a reference scene the crew had recorded 20 minutes before the anomaly. The instrument was within spec to the 4th decimal across the entire track. Then I did the overhead confirmation. Then I did Ras Al Had. Then I did the conductivity temperature depth cast from the research vessel. At 02:30 in the morning of the 12th of April, alone in my office on Naval Support Activity Bahrain, with coffee I had no memory of pouring, and a building so quiet I could hear the refrigerator in the break room 2 corridors over, I understood that the instrument had done its job. The instrument had reported, to the best of its engineering, what it had measured. What it had measured was a patch of water in which the infrared spectrum had gone to 0. Captain Daniel Varner answered on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting for the call. He said, "Come to Manama. I am sending a helo." I said it was the middle of the night. He said, "I know what time it is, Emil. I have been expecting you." He used my first name, which he had never done in the 3 months I had been attached to his squadron. I hung up the phone and I packed a bag. In the bag, I put my field notebook, my laptop, a spare hard drive, and a printed copy of my scripts dissertation from 2011, because I had a suspicion I could not name yet that Captain Varner was going to know what I had written about 12 years ago. And I was right. I was right before I understood what being right meant. The helo lifted off from Bahrain International at 0411. It was an MH-60R, cold night, coastal air heavy with salt and jet fuel, and I spent the flight with my notebook open on my knee, staring at a thermogram on a laptop screen I had angled away from the loadmaster. The image was a neutral gray scene with a single black circle in it. The circle was not drawn. The circle was the absence of every wavelength the instrument knew how to name. At 0433, I was in Captain Varner's office at Naval Support Activity Manama. On his desk was a folder. On the cover of the folder was a label written in pencil in a hand that was not his, and I did not know yet whose hand it was. The label said, Aster, floor paper. The folder was 12 years old. Someone had been keeping it for 12 years on a desk I had never sat at, waiting for the morning an instrument would finally do what my thesis said it might do. I had written the paper. I had forgotten about it. Someone else had not. Captain Varner opened the folder at 0440. He turned it 90 degrees and slid it across the desk so the label, Aster, floor paper, was upright in front of me. He did not speak while I read it. When I looked up, he said, "Emil, how many thermal nulls did you document in your dissertation?" I told him I had documented 4. He said, "I have 17. I am going to show you 7 of them today. I am going to need your word that you will not look at the others until you have met the man who is flying in from Muscat." I gave my word. He slid 7 pages out of the folder, face down. Each was a printout of a thermogram, or a hand-drawn reconstruction of one. Each had a coordinate at the top. I will not name them all here. I will name the one that had been in my own dissertation. August, 1977, southwest of Keshem Island. United States Navy surveillance film, later processed by Naval Research Laboratory. 3.1 meters across, 42 minutes duration. In the margin of the page, in pencil, in a hand that was not Varner's and was not the hand that had labeled the folder, was a single line. Signature consistent with floor paper, Aster, 2011. "When was this annotation made?" I asked. Varner said, 2011, before you defended. Someone I had never met, whose handwriting I did not recognize, had read my thesis before my own committee had read it. That person, whoever he or she was, had been matching a 17-count archive of ocean nulls against a framework I thought I had written for myself. The man from Muscat arrived at 0920. Dr. Yosef Axelrod was 74 years old. He had a heavy, deliberate way of setting down a bag. He was wearing a linen jacket that did not match the coastal humidity. He had flown in on a civilian carrier from Sib to Bahrain International, commercial economy, and had paid for the ticket himself. Captain Varner told me later that a transport had been arranged, and Axelrod had declined it. "He does not fly under anyone's orders," Varner said. "That is why he is useful." I asked Axelrod how he had come to know Captain Varner. He said, 32 years. We corresponded before we ever met." He did not elaborate. He opened his own bag and laid a notebook on the desk. Hardbound, green cloth, clearly private, clearly old. And he turned it to a page I could not read because it was handwritten in Russian. He rotated the page so it was facing me. The handwriting was dense and neat and dated at the top, 14 November, 1982. Underneath the date was a diagram. It was the same diagram, 3.1 meters, circular, perfect. The coordinates on the page were not Hormuz. They were Caspian, offshore of the Neft Dashlati oil platform, Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic. The duration noted at the bottom was 41 minutes. I was a junior oceanographer, Axelrod said. I was aboard the research vessel Equator. We were on an exercise in support of a submarine problem. One of our detectors returned what you are today calling 0. We were instructed to archive the reading as sensor failure. I archived it. I did not believe that it was sensor failure, so I kept a parallel notebook. This is the notebook. He turned 4 more pages, 4 more diagrams, 4 more dates spread across 1982 and 1983. Same morphology, same duration band, different coordinates along the Caspian shelf. I have waited, he said, a long time for someone to ask about this page. I asked him why he had kept the notebook. He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, because every Cold War leaves more in the water than ships. The ships are cataloged. What they were working on is not. He closed the notebook. He did not reopen it that day. Varner brought in breakfast, flatbread, olives, coffee from a small brass pot with a long handle. None of us ate much. Axelrod picked at an olive and then said, carefully, as if he were testing a floor before stepping on it. There were 7 of us on the Equator that day, 5 crew, 2 scientists. I am the only one still alive. I asked what had happened to the other 6. He said, 4 died in service of ordinary causes. 2 left the Navy and died in the same month of 1991 in 2 different cities. I am not making a claim. I am telling you the arithmetic. Captain Varner watched Axelrod while he said it. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had known the arithmetic for a long time and who had brought me into the room because I was the next person to whom the arithmetic might begin to apply. At 10:45 Bahrain time, Varner's staff officer came in with a thin manila folder and placed it on the desk. She did not speak. Varner looked at the folder. He looked at Axelrod. He said, "It is back." I said, "Back where?" He said, "Same coordinate, same diameter. It reappeared at 0910 Zulu. It has been on station since." I looked at my watch. It was 10:47 Bahrain local, which was 0747 Zulu, which meant the reading had already been stable for 117 minutes, nearly 3 times the duration of the first appearance. Axelrod closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he said, very quietly, "In 1982, it came back also. When it came back, it stayed longer each time." By 1400 that afternoon, Varner had unlocked the rest of the folder. 10 more thermograms, 10 more reconstructions, 10 more coordinates, and 3 of those 10 coordinates were the one I was looking at on the operational display behind Varner's desk. The Hormuz point had returned a 0 Kelvin null 4 times before the morning of 11th April. 1977, 1989, 2003, 2017. Every return the same 3.1 meters. Every return within the 40 to 46 minute duration band, except the 4th, which had lasted 54. The curve was not flat. The curve was drifting. I asked Varner whose handwriting the second pencil annotation belonged to. He said, "I do not know. The folder was handed to me in March of 2014 by an officer whose name is not cleared for this recording. I was told only that when the signature returned, I should put an infrared oceanographer in this office. He gave me 2 names. Yours was one of them. The other person is dead." I did not ask how the other person was dead. At 15:30, Saeed Al-Mamari walked into the office with a canvas bag and set it on the desk next to Axelrod's notebook. Saeed is 61 years old, retired Royal Oman Navy, a hydrographic surveyor by trade, who runs charter bathymetry out of Kasab at the northern tip of the Musandam. He was introduced as a friend of Axelrod's, but I understood from the way the 2 men did not look at each other and from the way they sat down at 90 degrees and not across, that their friendship was professional and long. Saeed took a leather-bound logbook out of the canvas bag. The log was in Arabic. The pages were hand-drawn. The ink was 43 years old. He turned to a page dated the 12th of March, 1983. He pointed at a sonar return. 3.1 meters across, circular, dated, signed by his father, Commander Jawad Al-Mamari, Royal Oman Navy, Musandam Sector Patrol. My father passed in 1994, Saeed said. He told me about this page once. He said the boats that cross directly above this coordinate come back with dead electronics, or with a crew member who does not speak for 4 to 5 days. He told me I was not to survey this point. I have not surveyed it. I am 61 years old. I will not survey it now. I asked if he would accompany an overflight. I will fly, he said. I will not sail. At 16:10, Axelrod reopened the green notebook and turned to a page I had not been shown that morning. He said, "There is a second entry you should see. It is from 2 days after the 14th of November, 1982. Our exercise was organized around a Project 641 boat, what you would call a Foxtrot-class diesel-electric submarine. The boat was part of the acoustic problem. After the thermal null appeared and the water returned to normal, the boat did not answer its communications. We located it on the bottom at 170 meters, intact. A rescue vessel raised it. There was no damage to the hull, no fire, no flooding, no internal casualty. The boat was clean." He paused. There were 58 men assigned to that submarine. None of them were aboard when the boat was recovered. The hatches were sealed from the inside. The operations log was written up to the minute the null appeared. After that, the pen had been placed neatly on the desk. He turned the notebook so I could see a second diagram. It was a plan view of a Foxtrot-class boat. The crew compartments were marked with crosses in red pencil. The caption underneath, in Russian, read, "They did not ask us where the men went." I sat with that for a long time. At some point, Varner had brought in Lieutenant Marisol Pacheco, his P-8 tactical coordinator from the morning flight, and Aircrewman First Class Noah Vandel, who had been on the sensor repeater screen when the null first appeared. They stood at the back of the office while Axelrod turned the page. Pacheco is a pragmatic officer, 15 years in, and she had gone quiet in a way that meant she was running her own arithmetic. Vandel was 28, and he had one hand flat on the surface of the desk behind him, the way a man touches a wall when he is not sure his legs are going to stay under him. I understood 3 things sitting in that office at 1650. The first was that my dissertation had been an operational document, not an academic one. Someone had read it in 2010, someone had put it in a folder in 2011, and someone had been waiting 15 years for a morning when the instrument would ring. I had not been a scientist asking a question. I had been a question that was eventually going to need an answer. The second was that the anomaly had a return address. Every return was the same coordinate. Every return was the same footprint. Every return was trending longer. An anomaly with a return address is not an anomaly. It is a correspondent. It was writing to us on a schedule it chose. The third, I did not say aloud. The third was that every person I had spoken to that day, Varner, Axelrod, Saeed, had already lost somebody to this correspondence, or had watched somebody lose themselves. I had not. Pacheco had not. Vandel had not. We were the 3 people in the room for whom the correspondence had not yet concluded a letter. At 17:10, Varner stood up, put his hands flat on the desk, and said, "We will need to go and look at it." The second overflight launched at 0601 on the 13th of April. I was in the back of the P-8. Saeed was in the left side observer seat, against the glass, and he did not take his hand off the armrest for the full 3 hours. Pacheco had the tactical coordinator station. Vandel was on the starboard sensor console. The null was on station when we arrived. Continuous since 0910 on the 12th, 21 hours and counting, and still reading 0 on every detector the aircraft carried. What Saeed noticed, and what the instruments had not flagged, was a physical ripple pattern on the sea surface around the null. The water beyond the 3.1 meter footprint was moving. Not in the pattern of current, not in the pattern of wind. It was oscillating outward from the edge of the footprint on a cycle my eye read as 12 seconds. I pulled up the high-resolution optical from the aircraft's electro-optical camera. The pattern was there. It had been there the entire flight. Nobody on my side of the instrumentation had flagged it because we had been looking at the infrared. Saeed said, "There is a source at the bottom. I do not need a chart to tell you that." A bathymetric survey was ordered. A second P-8 launched later that afternoon, carrying a subsea sonar package. Whatever the multi-beam returned was routed to a compartment I did not, at that point, hold access to. I was told, politely and without explanation, that the subsurface return for that coordinate was being held pending Program Office review. I asked who had directed the hold. The warrant officer who brought me the coffee shrugged and said, "Captain Varner." I did not press. Axelrod declined to board USNS Emory S. Land, the tender designated to stage any response effort at sea. He was asked twice. He gave the same answer both times. "I do not board American vessels. It is an old rule. Do not ask me to break it for this." He flew to Kasab with Saeed that afternoon. From Kasab, he returned to Muscat the following morning. I did not see him again in person for 6 weeks. Saeed came back across the strait on the 14th to help calibrate an Omani hydrographic asset. He did not cross the coordinate on the water. When the charter dhow he had hired had to run within 1 nautical mile of the point, he asked the skipper to adjust the track. The skipper adjusted. Saeed remained on the port side of the wheelhouse for the duration, and when the boat had cleared the mile, he sat down and drank a liter of bottled water in 1 pull. I watched him do this. I did not ask him to explain it. I was tasked, on the morning of the 15th, to run the American side of the archive. I spent 41 hours in a secure facility at Naval Support Activity Bahrain with an access account a warrant officer had built for me under the personal authority of Captain Varner. The search string Varner gave me was not a program name. It was 3 coordinates and a date range. I ran the coordinates against the Office of Naval Research Declassified Repository, the Naval Research Laboratory Historical Index, and the Naval History and Heritage Command Cold Storage Catalog. I got 1 hit. The file was named Deep Cold. The file had been shelved, according to its catalog record, under Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, Hygiene and Sanitation Division, subfile, Shipboard Food Storage Protocols, Mediterranean Fleet, Administrative. I have served long enough to know what that misfiling is. It is the routing a program office uses when it does not want a file indexed against any search a reasonable historian would run. You shelve a technical sensitive record under a mundane administrative division on a ship class that is no longer in service in a fleet command that was dissolved in 1980. Nobody is going to run that search. Nobody did. For 47 years. I opened the file at 0330 on the 17th of April, and I read it straight through to 0740 without leaving my chair. I am not going to reconstruct the file here in detail. What I will tell you is what the file said at the top of its executive summary, which had been typed on a manual typewriter on a single sheet of carbon-backed paper, and which had been countersigned by an assistant director of the Office of Naval Research in October of 1974. Deep Cold was a program. It was a United States Navy program. It had been retired in April of 1975, 6 months after the executive summary was signed. The summary read, and I am quoting directly, "Retrieval of any deep cold test article shall not be attempted except under conditions of demonstrated operational necessity. The program is closed. The hardware is not to be recovered." A program is retired on paper. Its hardware is retired in water. Vandell was on the flight line at 0800 on the 17th, standing beside his aircraft, and he was wearing his flight sunglasses indoors when I walked past him. I said, "Noah, are those tinted because of the overhead lights?" He said, "No, sir." He did not elaborate. That morning, I noted in my field notebook, because it was unusual, that he had turned his back to the glass of the operations center window and was facing the hangar wall and was eating his breakfast that way. Varner opened the compartmented meeting at 1100 on the 18th of April. There were 4 of us in the room: Varner, Pacheco, myself, and Axelrod on a secure video link from Muscat. Vandel was not in the room. Vandel had been pulled from flight status the evening before, pending medical review. I did not yet know why, and I did not yet ask. The door was hardened, the window was blanked. The ventilation was on the compartmented inner air cycle, which is the quieter cycle. I mention this because the absence of the usual hum was, that morning, loud. Varner began with the bathymetry. He put the subsea sonar return on the screen. I had not yet been cleared for it. I had been aware of its existence for 5 days without ever seeing a visual. The multibeam showed a matte black ellipsoid, approximately 2.4 by 1.1 meters, resting at 67 meters on a volcanic basalt shelf, covered by a thin silt overlay that had accumulated unevenly. The shape was not natural. The shape was engineered. There was a faded stencil visible on the upper dorsal surface, which a side-scan pass had captured in side-lit relief. The stencil read, and I read it aloud in the room because I wanted to hear the words as I said them: Project Deep Cold, Recovery Vehicle 04, United States Navy, October 1974. Varner said, "It has been on the bottom for 52 years. Axelrod from Muscat said, "In Russian we called ours Холодный стол." Cold table. The design was parallel. I will not say copied. I will say parallel. Deep Cold had been a submarine quieting research program. The recovery in the vehicle's designation was not a recovery of something external. It was a recovery of thermal energy. The device had been engineered to absorb ambient thermal radiance from surrounding seawater into a superconducting internal reservoir, producing, in a narrow radius, a brief, measurable collapse of the local infrared spectrum. The operational proposition was an acoustic corridor masking capability for United States ballistic missile submarines transiting choke points. The program closed in 1975. The executive summary I had read forbade retrieval of any test article. RV-04 had been dropped, under operational cover of Exercise Blue Aegis, on the 23rd of October 1974, from the fantail of a destroyer then assigned to the U.S. 7th Fleet. The destroyer was USS Benjamin Stoddert, DDG-22. Captain Varner said, in the same voice he had used for the bathymetry, "My father was the sonar officer on the Stoddert in '74. He handled the drop." I looked at him. He looked back at me. He said, "He never spoke about it. He left the service in 1978. He died in 2004. His personnel file is in the folder. His name was Daniel Varner, Sr. The other annotating hand on your dissertation, the one I said I did not recognize, is his." I understood, for the first time since the helo had lifted off at 0411 on the 12th of April, why I had been asked for. Varner Sr. had read my thesis draft in 2010. He had annotated it in 2011. He had died in 2004. My own committee had not seen the document until 2012. Somebody in the program office had been holding his margin notes forward, a dead man's annotations, carried by someone who understood what he had been looking for. The folder was the inheritance. I was the executor, and I had not known. The mechanism of the thing was almost simple. The device was dormant by design. It drew residual power from pressure-driven piezoelectric elements in its casing, keeping its superconducting reservoir cryogenic. But it was built to open its thermal intake and collapse the local IR signal only in the presence of a specific coherent acoustic input, submarine transit at a defined RPM band, intense, sustained, active sonar at a specific frequency cluster. Under normal oceanic conditions, nothing in nature produces that input. The device had slept for 52 years. On the morning of the 11th of April, 2026, 3 U.S. Navy destroyers on continuous active sonar inside the blockade line of the Strait of Hormuz, at close spacing, produced it. The device had answered. The device had been answering for 5 decades, every time the input crossed its threshold. The 1977 event, the 1989 event, the 2003 event, the 2017 event, all of them correlated in Axelrod's reconstruction with documented US or Soviet submarine transits or high-intensity sonar operations at that coordinate. Varner said, "The extraction has been authorized. The order came down yesterday. It came down while we were in this room the previous afternoon discussing whether to request it. The decision was made for us. We pull RV-04 up. USNS Emory S. Land will stage. Pacheco, you will coordinate the overflight picket. Astor, you are oceanographic lead." I said, "Captain, the executive summary explicitly prohibits retrieval." He said, "The executive summary is 51 years old. It has been overridden by a program office whose name is not cleared for this recording." I noticed, sitting there, that Axelrod had closed his eyes on the video link. He had aged in the 2 days since I had last seen him in person. When he opened his eyes, he said, "The device was not the secret. The device was declassified in substance the moment you read the file. The secret is what the device has been doing, quietly, in that water, for 52 years. Captain Varner, I must ask, and I am asking formally, because my asking on this channel is a record. Have you run a temperature profile on the surrounding water column in the last 24 hours? Varner's face did not change. He said, "Joseph, we will discuss that separately." Axelrod nodded, slowly, once, and said, "I understand." The meeting ended at 12:40. I went back to my office. I did not open my laptop for the rest of the afternoon. The extraction ran on the 22nd of April, day 60 of the conflict. USNS Emory S. Land anchored 12 nautical miles north of the coordinate at 0300. The dive plan was a saturation mix, heliox, 2-man teams, bell down from an auxiliary bell rigged off the portside crane. Surface support was a CB detachment diverted from port facility work in Jebel Ali. Pacheco was mission coordinator from the bridge. I was on the deck, in a warm-up space aft of the dive shack, with a temperature-calibrated IR probe in my hand that I was not going to put down until the object was out of the water. Vandell was on the tender. He had been medically pulled from flight status 5 days earlier. He had been brought across to the Emory S. Land under a separate order, the text of which I was never shown. He stood on the starboard side, out of the dive team's line of work, wearing his flight sunglasses, and he did not look toward the lift side of the ship at any point in the 6 hours I observed him that morning. I made a note of this in my field notebook. Vandell did not look at the object. He asked, once, whether he had to. The answer was no. First dive deployed at 0408. The divers reached the basalt shelf at 0431. 24 degrees Celsius at the thermocline, 22 at the bottom. They approached the ellipsoid on a hand-laid survey tape at the 10-foot separation mark. The lead was Chief Warrant Officer Ramon Esperanza, 26 years Navy diver, 3 deployments on this hull. Esperanza put a gloved palm on the upper dorsal surface of the ellipsoid and held it there for 5 seconds. His wrist dosimeter was on the open channel. He keyed through the bell comms and said, -19 at the skin, surface. -19 in 24-degree water, surface. Pacheco said, "Acknowledged, dive." He did not say it again. The rigging took 90 minutes. The lift was straight vertical, slow cable. Ascent at 0.2 meters per second. The object was under the hull floodlights at 0546. It breached at 0551. The moment the ellipsoid crossed the air-water interface, the surrounding seawater in a 10-meter radius began to flash cool. CTD probes dropped from 22 to 16 degrees inside 6 seconds and did not come back up for 11 minutes. The air temperature on deck, at 7 meters above the waterline, dropped 3.4 degrees in the same window. I am telling you this because I recorded it, and because I do not, to this day, have a mechanism that explains it. The object was craned onto a pre-laid cradle on the port-aft deck. The skin temperature did not change. -19 at the surface. -19 3 hours after removal. -19 at 12 hours. A thin rime of frost formed on the matte black casing within the first hour and stayed, crystal slow, for the duration of transport. The air immediately around the cradle read 4 degrees above 0 Celsius for a radius of approximately 1.5 meters. The air beyond that radius was the ordinary 26-degree April air of the lower Gulf. There was no transition band. There was a line. At 10:15, Ship's Medical ran Vandel through a scheduled retinal thermal imaging protocol. The corpsman who ran the scan was a hospital corpsman first class named Delia Okoro. She did not believe the first scan. She ran it twice more. She pulled me down to the dispensary at 11:40. She showed me the overlay. Vandel's right retina at the foveal center showed a persistent thermal decrement of 2.3 degrees Celsius below the surrounding retinal tissue. The decrement was circular. It held stable across 3 scans. It did not dissipate when he closed his eyes. It did not dissipate when he slept, which she had verified by scanning him again at 2000 that evening, after he had gone down for 2 hours. The cold spot on his retina was 3.1 millimeters across at the foveal scale. I will only tell you the ratio because the ratio is what I could not stop looking at once it was in front of me. The cold spot on his retina was, proportionally, the same size and geometry as the patch on the water had been to the footprint on the ocean. Vandel was briefed at 2200. He took it well. He said, "I figured." He said, "Am I going to be able to fly?" Okoro said, "No." He nodded. He said, "That is fine." He stood up. He walked out of the dispensary. He turned right in the passageway instead of left, which was the opposite of the direction to his berth. He stood at the fantail for 11 minutes. He did not look at the cradle. He did not look at the water. He watched the wake at the stern with his sunglasses on at 2200 at night in unlit air. He came inside. He went to his berth. At 0430 on the 23rd, Varner sent me a single text message on the closed net. We pulled it up. This was the only way we knew how. That did not mean we knew what we pulled up. I read it twice. I went up on deck. The object was on the cradle. The air around it held its 4-degree line. The rime of frost had not thickened. The rime of frost had not melted. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. The official report is 4 pages long. I signed it on the 3rd of June, 2026, in a secure facility at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington. The report describes the recovery of one United States Navy research article, Deep Cold Recovery Vehicle 04, from the seabed of the Strait of Hormuz on the 22nd of April. The report describes the article as a Cold War-era submarine quieting prototype. The report describes the article's historical intermittent activations as residual thermal events correlated to submarine transit. The report describes the recovery as successful, the anomaly as resolved, and the site as stable. The report is available under FOIA in redacted form. The redactions include the stencil on the device, the Varner family, Axelrod's name, the Caspian 1982 parallel, the Foxtrot incident, and the 41 coordinates at which the phenomenon has been independently documented on both sides of the former Iron Curtain. Dr. Josef Axelrod returned to Muscat on the 24th of April and did not answer my correspondence. I wrote to him 3 times. I called twice. On the 5th contact, a birthday card, in March of the following year, I received a single line back, in English, in his own hand. "Emile, there is nothing I can add that you do not already know, and there is nothing I will add that you do not already know." I have kept the card. Saeed al-Mamari returned to Kasab. He still runs bathymetry charters out of the northern Musanda. He does not accept U.S.-flagged contracts. He does not cross the coordinate. His son is 22 and finishing engineering at Sultan Qaboos University. Saeed has told him not to go to sea under anyone's flag. Lieutenant Marisol Pacheco was reassigned, at her own request, to a staff post at Pacific Fleet, non-deployable. She does not answer my messages. I do not think this is personal. I think it is that she has decided, for reasons I do not have the standing to question, not to carry what she knows into another conversation. Captain Daniel Varner retired from the Navy on the 10th of June, 2026, after 31 years of service. He lives in a small house in the Shenandoah Valley. I saw him once, in September. He asked me whether I had slept. I told him the truth. He said, "Neither have I. Neither did my father." He said it the way a man says a thing he has been meaning to say for 40 years and has only now found the other half of the sentence for. Aircrewman First Class Noah Vandell is the part I have the most trouble putting down. He was medically retired in July of 2026. He lives in a suburb of Virginia Beach with his wife and his older brother's daughter, whom they are raising. His right retina continues to show the thermal decrement documented at 10:15 on the 22nd of April at every scan he has had since. He wears amber welder's glass in any room whose ambient light drops below 90 lumens per square meter. He sleeps under a sleep mask fitted with a low-intensity LED array on the interior surface, because when he closes his eyes in the dark, he sees the patch on the back of his eyelids, clearly and steadily. He has taught himself not to close his eyes for longer than 6 seconds at a time in unlit conditions. His wife says he blinks in pairs now, one quick, one short, in a rhythm that does not look like blinking to anyone who does not know what he is doing. He is otherwise well. He is employed as an electronics technician at a commercial aviation shop. He is a good husband. He is a good uncle. The cold spot on his retina was 3.1 millimeters across the first time Corpsman Okoro scanned him. According to the most recent scan I have been shown, it is now 4.8 millimeters across. It is growing. There is a watch on the Hormuz coordinate that I am not cleared to describe, and that I will describe only to the degree that the fact of the watch is the fact I need you to carry. Somebody is looking at that point of water, from above, on a cadence, with instruments. The patch did not dissipate with the extraction of RV-04. The patch was on the surface when the device came out of the water on the 22nd of April, 2026, and the patch was still on the surface 11 weeks later, and the patch is on the surface as I am writing this sentence in April of 2027. On the last overhead pass I have been shown, the patch measures 4.7 meters. The 1977 event was 3.1. The 2026 appearance was 3.1. The post-extraction footprint is 4.7. The curve, as of the last pass, is still bending. The cold is spreading. The instrument that reads the cold is still reading 0. The instrument on the back of Noah Vandell's eye is reading the same 0, at the same proportional scale, on the same curve. The official report says the anomaly has been resolved. I signed the report. I am telling you, because I am the only one who will tell you, that the report is wrong. Deep Cold was a program. It was retired in 1975. Its hardware was left in the water. The hardware has been recovered. The water is still cold. The cold was never the machine. The cold is what the machine taught the water how to do. The machine is in a storage locker in Maryland. The water is still here. The water has been practicing.